Hi, I'm Ione, and my daughter told me to wait by the parking lot after her wedding ceremony said they'd come pick me up. I waited in my beige dress, heels pinching, holding a gift I wrapped with trembling hands. They never came. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding out I'd paid for the entire wedding. While watching someone else sit in my seat, wear my title, and call herself Mother of the Bride. What do you do when your own child rewrites the story and erases you completely? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday thick, creamy cardstock with gold foil edges, the kind meant to impress. It had Vera's name embossed on the flap in a script that wasn't hers. The moment I saw it, I felt something tighten in my chest, a sensation I'd learned long ago to ignore. I sat down at the small kitchen table in my Charleston home, the late morning light filtering through the lace curtain like memories I hadn't asked to revisit. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear it. Inside was a beautiful invitation to my daughter's wedding. The font was delicate, the venue grand. The ceremony would be held at Tidewater Gardens, the same place her father and I had once driven past, joking we'd never be fancy enough to book it, but something was missing. I flipped the card over, turned it in my hand. There was no mention of a reception, no dinner, no dancing, no second address, just the ceremony at 3 p.m. I reread it twice, then again, frowning. Maybe it was a mistake, a printing error. Surely they didn't forget that part. I picked up the phone and dialed Vera. She answered on the third ring, breathless and cheerful. "Mom, you got it. Isn't the venue stunning? It is," I said carefully, but I didn't see anything about the reception. There was a pause, short but sharp. "Oh, that," she said lightly. "It's just a small thing, mostly for Thomas's side. Don't worry, you'll still be part of the day. After the ceremony, we'll swing by and pick you up. Just wait near the parking lot exit." "Okay, just wait." I didn't argue. I've learned not to push when Vera's tone goes sugar slick. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Okay." She sighed in relief. "Great, I knew you'd understand. It's just easier this way." Easier for who? When we hung up, I stared at the phone for a moment longer. Then I set it down, walked over to the cabinet, and pulled out the box I keep for special occasions, my good ribbon, my satin paper. I would still give her a gift. It wasn't about how I was treated. It was about how I showed up. The next day, I took the bus to the downtown shops. I found a simple, elegant dress in soft beige, the kind Vera always said looked respectable. A clerk offered me a navy blue one that made my eyes glow. I held it up against myself for a second, but beige felt safer, less likely to draw comment. I wrapped the gift by hand when I got home, tying the ribbon carefully. Then I sat at the kitchen table, clipping a note to the top. "To Vera and Thomas, may this be your beginning. Love. Mom." 2 days later, Vera called again. Her voice was breezy, like she was already halfway through a glass of something sparkling. "Oh, quick thing, we've updated the color scheme. Everyone's going with navy now, but no pressure. Mom, beige is fine too. Too late to return it. Too tight to buy another." I muttered something agreeable, and she chirped, "Perfect, perfect." That night. I laid the dress across my bed, smoothed out the wrinkles. I packed the gift carefully in a tote bag and placed it by the front door. The invitation sat beside it, still silent about the reception. I reread the card again, even though I knew every word by heart. I texted her, "Just to be sure, still meet you after the ceremony." She replied instantly, "Yes, just stay at the parking lot exit. We'll find you." I put the phone on the charger and set 2 alarms. "It's her big day," I whispered to myself as I turned out the lights. "Don't make it about you." I arrived 15 minutes early, just to be sure, standing by the curb in my quiet, beige dress. The parking lot behind Tidewater Garden stretched wide, the asphalt still holding on to the afternoon sun. I stood beneath the small wooden sign that read, "Vent loading only," gripping the gift bag in one hand and my clutch in the other. I checked my phone one last time. Battery at 80%. No new messages. I looked around for a place to sit, but there were no benches, just a low concrete curb that didn't seem built for resting. I stood instead, feet close together, smoothing the hem of my dress as the minutes crept by. At exactly 3:00 p.m., the music began inside the venue. I could hear the distant strains of a string quartet, soft, elegant. A sound I used to dream would accompany Vera's walk down the aisle. I imagined her now, bouquet trembling just a bit in her hands, Thomas looking at her like she was the answer to a prayer. I hoped someone would take a photo. By 4:15, I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. I tried not to look at the entrance too often. Didn't want to seem impatient. I told myself they're busy. Things run late. It's her big day. Be patient. At 5:00, a golf cart buzzed past carrying silver trays of appetizers and clinking glasses. I caught a glimpse of champagne flutes and a tower of tiny cakes. A staff member paused nearby and looked at me. "Are you with someone?" he asked kindly. "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "They're coming." By 6:20, the sun had dipped low, casting golden light across the lot. Most of the cars were gone now, replaced by delivery vans and catering trucks. I sat on the edge of the curb, knees stiff, ankles throbbing in my shoes. My gift bag, with its careful ribbon and glittering paper, rested against my leg like a promise that was never picked up. A security guard came by just after 7:00. He was young, polite, wearing a too big uniform and concern in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said gently, "do you need help? I can call someone." I shook my head. "No, thank you. I've got it." He nodded, hesitated, and walked away slowly. With the last of my phone's charge, I opened a ride app and called a cab. I spoke barely above a whisper, embarrassed by the tremor in my voice. The driver arrived 10 minutes later, a quiet man who said nothing when he saw me standing alone in a wedding guest dress at the back of a parking lot. At home. I set the gift down on the counter, untouched. I didn't even take off my shoes before plugging in my phone. The screen flickered on and buzzed with notifications. At the top was a Facebook tag, Vera's wedding album. I opened it with a numb thumb. The first image showed Vera and Thomas beneath a cascade of fairy lights, their faces lit with joy. Her dress was stunning, her smile radiant. Everyone stood around them in a semicircle laughing, holding glasses, arms looped together like garlands. The caption read, "Just family. Just perfect." I zoomed in on the photo. My seat, the one I had imagined, the one I didn't ask for but had silently hoped might be waiting, was occupied by someone else, someone with perfect posture and a knowing smile. I recognized her vaguely. Thomas's aunt, perhaps. There were more photos, dancing, speeches, a long dining table filled with candles and hand-lettered name cards. Vera clinking glasses with Thomas's parents, her arm around the woman who sat where I wasn't supposed to be. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat on the couch, the hem of my dress still brushing my ankles, and stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. The gift I carried home felt heavier than when I'd wrapped it, because now I knew no one had wanted it. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching the dust in the air like tiny, weightless secrets. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my robe, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea I'd forgotten to sip. The silence in the house felt deeper that day, not empty, but hollowed. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen, an old friend from church who had somehow made the guest list. We hadn't spoken in months, but her name still made me smile. "You looked beautiful in that old family photo." The message read, "Too bad they didn't use it in the final slideshow." My thumb hovered over the screen. Slideshow, I didn't remember any photographers near me. I hadn't been inside. I replied with something short, "Thank you," maybe then set the phone down, heart drumming softly. I walked to the kitchen window and stared out at the azalea bush in the yard. It was just starting to bloom, defiant pink against green. I told myself not to care. I failed. Minutes later, Helen sent a video link. "Here's what they sent out to everyone who was there," she added. I clicked the link. The opening frame was a soft focus shot of Vera as a toddler, running across the lawn at our old house, her curls bouncing with every step. Music played faintly in the background, an instrumental version of a song she used to hum when nervous. Then came images from her high school years, graduation, college apartment, vacations with Thomas. It was polished, clean, beautiful, and wrong. Because I wasn't there. Or rather, I had been. In one frame, I could see the outline of my arm, resting on a bench beside her. The rest of me had been cropped out, sloppily. My floral sleeve clashed against the clean pastel edit, like a truth someone had tried to erase but didn't quite succeed. I paused the video and zoomed in, my fingers still there. I closed the browser, reopened it, watched the video again. Frame by frame, I was missing from birthdays I hosted, trips I funded, moments I photographed myself. Not once did my name appear. No mention, no nod, no voice. It wasn't an accident. I opened my email and searched Lumina Weddings, the planner's name. A message appeared, dated 3 weeks ago. "Dear family, please review the video for input." I clicked the link. The older version played. My voice laughed over the beach waves as I held a younger Vera steady in the tide. I held her hand at graduation, adjusted her cap. There was a photo of us in the kitchen, me frosting her birthday cake while she watched with frosting on her nose. This version was warm, honest. I watched them side by side, the original and the final cut. Where I once stood, space now filled with a vase of flowers, a cropped friend, a closer crop of Vera smiling alone. I opened a new email, addressed it to Vera, typed slowly. Was I too much to be remembered? Then I stared at the words, deleted them, wrote again. I saw the slideshow, deleted again. The weight wasn't just in being excluded, it was in knowing someone took the time to make sure I didn't exist. I closed the laptop and walked into the living room. From the sideboard, I pulled out the old photo box. The lid creaked from disuse. Inside were prints I had developed by hand before smartphones, before edits. Real things, with fingerprints and bent corners. I pulled out 3 photos, the ones they'd cropped, laid them side by side on the table. Then I opened my email drafts and printed the slides, the messages, the screenshots. I spread them out like evidence not of wrongdoing, but of erasure. "You can cut me out of the frame," I said aloud. Voice even, but not out of the truth. That night, I fell asleep with those pictures beside me, and not a single one of them lied. The morning light didn't soften anything. I woke with the heaviness of too much clarity, the kind that settled into the bones rather than lifted with the dawn. My eyes burned, not from tears they had dried hours ago, but from the weight of everything I hadn't said. The house smelled of old coffee and wilting flowers. My dress from yesterday still hung near the door, the sleeves folded neatly over the hanger, as if they, too, had waited for a different ending. I padded to the kitchen in my slippers, the floor cool beneath my feet, and turned on my phone. A new message sat there, time-stamped 11:52 p.m. "So sorry, Mom, it got crazy here. Hope you got home okay. Love you. No phone call. No follow-up. No apology. I read the message once, then again. Each time, the softness in her words wore thinner. It got crazy was what you said when the dog ran loose at a barbecue, not when your mother was left alone in a parking lot for hours. Hope you got home, okay, was not a question. It was an exit. Love you was the Band-Aid applied too late to a wound already infected. I set the phone face down on the table and let the silence sit with me. I didn't rush to dress, didn't force myself into activity. There was no point in pretending this hadn't happened. Around midday, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. A young man stood outside, wearing a vest with the logo of the event company stitched on the chest. He held a small white box in his hands. "Delivery for Miss Ione," he said. It was found in the service van this morning, listed as unclaimed gift. I took it with a nod, closed the door gently behind me. The ribbon was still tied just as I'd left it. My handwriting on the tag hadn't smudged. It felt foreign in my hands now, like a relic from someone else's hope. I carried it to the table and sat, unwound the ribbon slowly, let it fall in a curl across the wood, lifted the lid. Inside, the photo album lay exactly as I'd placed it, cream pages, smooth leather cover. I had spent hours arranging those photos. Vera's first tooth, her ballet recital, the time she built a snowman with a crooked smile. My notes were there, handwritten beneath each picture, age 5, the owl costume you insisted on, the time you read to Grandpa, your last school lunch I almost forgot the juice. Tucked into the front flap was the card I'd written. To Vera and Thomas, with all the love that raised you. Mom, I pressed it to my chest for a moment. Not for sentiment, but because I needed to feel something warm, even if it was paper. Then I stood. I walked the album to the kitchen, placed it on the counter, took a breath, and dropped it into the trash bin. I didn't slam the lid. I didn't whisper a prayer. I didn't even hesitate. If they didn't want the memory, I wouldn't force it to exist. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Let's catch up soon. I stared at the screen. No mention of what had happened. No reference to my absence. Just a casual rope thrown across a chasm she didn't even try to bridge. I didn't respond. Didn't touch the screen. I turned the phone face down again, like closing a book I wasn't ready to reread. The next morning, I wrote a list not for groceries, but for memories that hurt. The notification came in just after breakfast. It buzzed through quietly, like all warnings do, polite and unassuming. I was rinsing out my teacup when my phone lit up on the counter. Bank alert, a transaction over your set limit has been processed. I frowned. I hadn't bought anything except groceries. No recent medical bills, no travel, no home repairs. I dried my hands and opened the app. $12,000 to Lumina Weddings and Events. Cleared. I stared at the number like it belonged to someone else's life. Then I scrolled further and saw it charged through a card I had co-signed years ago, back when Vera was between jobs and needed a safety net. I sat down. It took me a few minutes to gather my breath, my logic, my nerve. Then I called the number listed on the invoice. A chipper assistant answered, her voice too bright for what I needed to hear. "Hi, this is Marcy with Lumina Events. How can I help? I'm calling about an invoice I just saw," I said slowly. $12,000. Charged to a card under my name. She clicked keys, then hummed. Yes, Vera confirmed that this would be covered by her mother. It's been processed already. I didn't reply. The silence stretched. Eventually, she said, "Was that incorrect?" "No," I said. It wasn't unexpected. I hung up. That afternoon, while waiting for the kettle to whistle, I opened my laptop and found the planner's Instagram. They had posted several images from the event, already Vera and Thomas under hanging lights, Guests twirling sparklers, a dessert table overflowing with miniature cakes. The caption under the main photo read, "Fully sponsored by the groom's family. A perfect union, made possible by love and generosity." I didn't cry. I took a screenshot, then another, then saved them all in a folder I named Proof. I didn't call Vera. I sent her a text instead. I saw the invoice. The dots bubbled for a long time before a reply came. "Mom, we'll talk soon. Let's not make this a thing. You wanted to help, right?" I stared at the screen. I wasn't sad. Not this time. Something deeper moved beneath my ribs' clarity. Cold, clean clarity that washed away the fog. That evening, I pulled out the manila folder from the back of the hall closet. Support to Vera was written in faded ink on the tab. I opened it on the dining room table. Inside were receipts yellowed by time, copies of cashier's checks, loan confirmations, bank transfers, each neatly labeled, dated, signed. A check from 2007 for her dental work. A wire transfer for her apartment deposit in Los Angeles. The tuition payment for that certificate course she never finished. Each line told a story. Some I'd forgotten. Others I had folded into my memory like dutiful linens used, cleaned, stored without complaint. I began sorting them into two piles, one given without regret, the other used against me. The second pile was thicker, much thicker. By the time I set that folder down, something inside me wasn't wounded. It was waking up. It was just another morning. The same mug, the same chair by the window. But that day, my coffee tasted bitter before the first sip. Scrolling through my phone had become a habit I resented but couldn't break. I tapped into the app out of reflex and saw my name tagged in a new photo. A friend of Vera's, someone I barely remembered, had posted a group shot from the reception. Everyone was dressed in navy and smiling around a long, candle-lit table. The caption read, "What a beautiful night." Every detail was perfect. Every seat filled with love. I zoomed in. There at the head table stood a tall sign in rose gold script, "Mother of the Bride." The woman seated beneath it wasn't me. It was Thomas's mother. I stared at the photo. My name wasn't in the comments. No one had corrected the title. No one had noticed the absence. I clicked into another post, this one a video. Vera stood beneath a canopy of lights, microphone in hand, her smile wide and radiant. "I want to thank the people who raised me," she said, glancing at Thomas. "But more importantly, the ones who raised us together." She turned toward her new in-laws. "To Carol, thank you for showing me what grace looks like. You've been like a second mother to me. Actually, no. You've been the mother I always dreamed of becoming." Laughter. Applause. I didn't hear the rest. My name wasn't spoken. Not once. Not even a passing thank you for existence. I closed the video and opened another photo. A guest had posted the seating chart, a glossy board with elegant lettering. I scanned for my name. Nothing. In the lower corner was a name I didn't recognize, seated where I should have been. I followed the caption. Every seat was perfectly placed for a perfect evening. Perfect. I was learning what that word meant to Vera. Later that day, I went to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription. As I stood in line, flipping through a magazine without reading it, I heard a voice behind me. Ione. It was Mrs. Kavanaugh, our neighbor from the old block. Her hair was shorter now, her voice as curious as ever. "I heard about Vera's wedding," she said, bright-eyed. "Wasn't it just beautiful?" I opened my mouth to agree, to nod and move on. But the truth slipped out first. I wasn't really invited. She blinked. "Oh." I thought I gave her a tight smile. A lot of people did. She nodded, suddenly fascinated by the candy display beside us. That evening, I sat with my tea and stared at the photos again. not out of self-pity, but to understand, to accept, to see it fully, without illusion. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote at the top, things that were mine, but they gave away. Under it, I listed my seat, my title, my presence. And below that list, for the first time, I wrote another title, one no one could steal witness. It started with a scroll. Late afternoon sunlight streaked across the kitchen floor as I sat in my usual chair, tea cooling beside me. My thumb moved lazily over my phone screen, more habit than curiosity. I told myself I wasn't looking for anything, just passing time. Then I saw it. The wedding planner had posted a behind-the-scenes reel. The thumbnail showed Vera mid-laugh, her hand brushing back her hair like she used to when she wanted people to think she wasn't trying. I clicked play before I could talk myself out of it. Music played under snippets of clinking glasses and golden light. A series of shots, the cake being wheeled in, napkins fluffed, candles lit. Then Vera appeared, walking beside the planner, smiling into the lens. She didn't want a big fuss, she said, waving one hand dismissively. My mom, she's always been more of a quiet presence. The planner chuckled. Vera went on. We kept things low-key on purpose. She likes it that way. We didn't want to overwhelm her. Everyone in the video laughed, except me. I turned up the volume, replayed the clip, heard the certainty in her voice, the practiced distance, and it hit me, not just what she said, but what it meant. They weren't sorry I wasn't there. They were relieved. I exited the video and sat still for a long moment. The air felt thinner somehow. Then I opened another tab and found a tagged photo from the reception. A high-resolution shot of the printed guest list, stylized and elegant on its easel. I zoomed in. There it was. Ms. Irene Carter, assistant to vendor. I blinked. Irene Carter was me. Or at least, the version someone had created to fill a space with a name that didn't belong. My real name wasn't on the seating chart. My table didn't exist. I was never expected, never included, never meant to be there at all. My phone vibrated. A text from Vera. Hey, hope you liked everything. We're wiped. That was it. No mention of the folder labeled Mother of the Bride that wasn't mine. No apology for the invisible ink she used to write me out of the night. I stared at the message, then deleted the thread entirely. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Something had shifted. I opened my laptop, created a new folder on the desktop. I named it Receipts. Inside it, I saved screenshots of the guest list, the video clip, and the Instagram captions. I even scanned in the gift return tag and the guest envelope with my misspelled name. Then I sat back in my chair, looked at the folder icon glowing on the screen. Not forgotten. Ignored. There's a difference. And the more they tried to smile me into silence, the more I knew I had to stop whispering. It was late afternoon when I rang the bell. The air outside Vera's house felt heavier than it should have been. I stood on her porch, the folder clutched tightly in my hand, not because I needed it, but because I needed her to see I was done pretending. She opened the door slower than usual, her smile too practiced. Mom, I wasn't expecting I want to understand what happened. I said. My voice was even, not cold, just done. She blinked, stepped aside, but I didn't walk in. I stayed on the mat. Her eyes glanced down at the folder. Look, if this is about the video, the post, it's all just... She paused. The spin hadn't quite found its rhythm yet. Then she exhaled and tilted her head, adopting a tone I knew too well, the one that carried a veneer of compassion over dismissal. Mom, this whole thing, it wasn't about you. Don't make it about you. We did our best. I didn't speak. Not because I was stunned, not because I needed time to find the words. but because the silence after hers said everything I needed, I turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. That night, Leora called me. Her voice was soft, her camera tilted slightly to one side as if she'd propped it up herself. Grandma. Yes. Sweetheart. Her eyes were uncertain. Why weren't you at the party? Mom said you didn't feel well. I looked at her, this child who still knew how to ask real questions, who hadn't yet learned how to edit love for convenience. I swallowed. Sometimes grown-ups say things to protect themselves. She nodded slowly, but I could see her thinking. I hoped she'd never stop. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table. The light above flickered slightly. I made a mental note to change the bulb, then forgot it entirely as I reached for my file drawer. I pulled out every financial statement from the past decade, every check, every wire, every just until things level out transaction that never circled back. Tuition, car payments, rent deposits, dress fittings, a dog groomer. I opened my online banking. One by one, I began canceling the auto transfers. As I moved through each one, something uncurled in my chest. Not bitterness, not even grief, just space. When I finished, I took a deep breath. My hands trembled, not from doubt, but from the release of carrying too much for too long. I picked up a pen and wrote a letter I would never send. You didn't forget me. You erased me. But I remember everything. I stared at the words, then tore the page in half, dropped it into the trash with the quiet finality of someone who no longer needed permission to move on. The next morning, her wedding bills began returning this time to the right address. The voicemail came just after I'd trimmed the last of the basil in the kitchen window box. "Hi, Miss Sinclair," the voice chirped. "This is Marcy from Lumina Weddings. Vera mentioned you'd be handling the honeymoon invoice, but it bounced today. Please advise." I pressed delete without hesitation. For once, no reply felt like the most honest one I could give. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. This time it was Vera. No preamble, just panic. The florist called. They said the card was declined. I said nothing. She went on, breath quickening. The decorator invoice bounced too. The credit card company says the account isn't authorized anymore. What did you do? I made other arrangements, I said calmly. You're sabotaging this on purpose, she snapped. No, Vera, you did that yourself. Click. That night, I sat with my tea, the mug warming my hands while my laptop glowed faintly in the dark. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't shared a word of what happened, but others had. Someone, maybe one of the guests, had clipped the part of Vera's speech where she thanked her mother-in-law and called her the mother I always dreamed of becoming. It was posted with the caption, "Is this her real mom?" Another tagged video showed me, in the background, waiting in the parking lot, holding a gift no one claimed. Comments flowed faster than I could read. She was outside the whole time. Unbelievable. That's your actual mom. This is heartbreaking. Vera's curated world began to fracture at the edges. Her perfect night was being re-examined, one screenshot at a time. The next morning, Thomas's name popped up on my caller ID. I didn't pick up, but I knew. Later, I heard from someone that his mother had seen the posts. That evening, Vera sat across from him at their kitchen table. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the tone, the look. I had lived long enough with both. You said your mom didn't want to be involved, Thomas said quietly. Vera didn't reply. She just closed the laptop. The silence between them wasn't loud, but it was final. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Vera's return address was typed, not handwritten. Inside was a formal letter, lawyered in tone but desperate underneath. A refund agreement. It said, a request for me to resume financial support for the sake of family peace. The phrasing was cold, the ask was warm, and it came with an attached spreadsheet of upcoming costs. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and wrote 3 words across the front in dark ink, "Return to sender." Then I walked it to the mailbox myself. It wasn't just a bounced payment, it was the first time silence cost them something. The television was on, but I wasn't really watching until I heard her name. It was a daytime segment, a panel of hosts discussing weddings gone wrong, influencers facing backlash, the latest trend in cake flavors. I had only half listened until a guest leaned forward and said, "There's a clip circulating, Mother of the Bride drama. Pretty heartbreaking stuff." The screen cut to a grainy phone recording, one I recognized instantly. Vera, beneath string lights, raising a glass. "To Carol," she said, glowing. "The mother I always dreamed of becoming." Then the voiceover added, crisp and detached, "When your real mother's outside and your praise goes to someone else, the internet doesn't forget." I took a sip of my tea. It had gone cold. Still, I drank it. No reaction, no tightening in my chest, just the kind of stillness that follows a long storm. The fallout didn't take long. By that afternoon, Vera was inundated. Corporate sponsors that once sent her skincare and pre-packaged lifestyle kits now requested clarification. One paused her partnership entirely. Her PR assistant, someone I'd never met, but once watched rearrange a charcuterie board with surgical precision, resigned without fanfare. The curated life Vera had polished to a shine began to show fingerprints. At home. I imagined the conversations behind closed doors, the murmurs from the brand reps, the tight-lipped email threads. But mostly, I thought about the silence in her own house. That evening, Thomas said it aloud. "You didn't just humiliate your mother," he told her, standing in their kitchen. "You humiliated me." She didn't answer, just closed her laptop, hands trembling faintly. The conversation never finished, but it didn't need to. The next day, a small package arrived at my door. No return label, no card. Inside, wrapped in plain tissue, was the photo album I had made, the one that was returned to me by the planner's assistant weeks ago. It was still unopened, but now a sticky note was affixed to the cover. "You keep it. You're the only one who meant it." No signature, but the handwriting wasn't hers. It was Thomas's. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply held the book in both hands and walked it to the living room. I opened my bookshelf, cleared a space beside the recipe books and the old gardening guides, and placed it gently in its new home, not in shame, not in grief, but as proof that I had not disappeared. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wasn't erased. I wrote. I was redrawn, on my own terms. I lit a small candle, not for anyone else's memory, but for my own peace, and pulled out the folder labeled Will and Estate. A pen in my hand. I added a line to the first page. "Only those who remember me as real may receive anything of mine. What they lost was measured in silence, but what I gained, I could finally hear clearly." She came on a Sunday morning, without warning, without makeup. I heard the knock before I saw her, soft but steady. I opened the door, and there Vera stood, empty hands, pale face, a coat too thin for the breeze. She looked like someone who had rehearsed every possible opening line and forgotten them all the moment she saw my eyes. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't move from the threshold. I didn't offer a smile or scowl. I just stepped outside and gently closed the door behind me. We stood on the porch, side by side but worlds apart. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." I folded my arms. Not in anger, just to keep myself from reaching for softness that no longer served me. I didn't expect it either, I said. But then again, I didn't expect a lot of things. She looked down at her hands. It got complicated. We were trying to keep things smooth. You mean polished. She didn't argue. I let the silence stretch long enough to feel real. Then I said, I'm not angry anymore. Her eyes lifted, surprised, but I'm not who I was. I continued, you don't get to come back to the same version of me. She exhaled shakily. So we start over, don't we? I said, we begin again. Those are not the same. Just then, the sound of sneakers on gravel. Leora rounded the corner, backpack slung over her shoulder, arms outstretched. Grandma. I knelt slightly to catch her as she threw herself into my arms. Her hair smelled like strawberries and the kind of joy no one had taught her to filter. Vera stood off to the side, unsure whether to smile or wait. As we stepped inside, I turned to Leora and said, You've always known how to see people even when others forget to look. She nodded like she understood. We spent the afternoon in the garden. I showed Leora the new herbs sprouting by the fence, how the chives had started to flower early. She listened with the rapt attention of someone who believes small things matter. Vera trailed behind, lingering near the gate, as if unsure whether she was allowed back in. I didn't call her forward. I didn't send her away either. That evening, after Leora had fallen asleep on the couch and Vera had left with a promise to check in soon, I sat with my journal and a cup of tea, still warm. I wrote, Forgiveness isn't about handing back what they dropped. It's about choosing not to carry it anymore. And that night, I slept like the earth finally stopped spinning just enough for me to stand still. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, comforting in a way most endings are not. I sat across from Mr. Harrington, my lawyer for over 2 decades. His glasses slid down his nose as he read through the last page of my file, then looked up and nodded. It's all official now, he said. Vera is no longer a beneficiary. Leora is the sole heir, the trust, the house, everything. And the letter for her 18th birthday is sealed and secured. I signed the final line with steady hands. No tremble, no regret. On the way home, I stopped at the post office. I slipped a copy of the will printed, bound, and unmistakably legal into a manila envelope and addressed it to Vera. On the front, I placed a small sticky note in handwriting she'd recognize instantly. This is what your silence cost you. That afternoon, the local paper published a small piece in the community section. Former nurse establishes educational trust for granddaughter. A photo accompanied the article, me, standing in my garden, smiling beside the rosemary bush. There was no mention of weddings, titles, or familial theatrics. Just one woman, choosing legacy on her own terms. 2 days later, an email arrived. The subject line read, I didn't mean to erase you. It was long, littered with half excuses dressed as reflections. I thought you'd always be there. I didn't realize how things would look. It wasn't intentional. I read every word. Then, without replying, I forwarded it to Mr. Harrington with a new subject. No action needed. That weekend, I returned to the parking lot behind Tidewater Gardens, not for ceremony, but for closure. The sun was kinder this time, the breeze gentler, and sitting on the bench, swinging her legs with a cone of mint chip in her hand, was Leora. She looked up and smiled. I got here early. I sat beside her. You're the only one, I said, whoever asked why I wasn't inside. She looked at me, soft-eyed and unafraid, because it never made sense. You were always part of the story. At home later, we went into the garden. I taught her how to cut roses with care, where to clip, how to avoid bruising the bloom. As we dusted our hands, she asked, "Do you ever miss her?" I paused, not to think, but to let the question settle. "Sometimes," I said, "but missing someone isn't the same as needing them." I walked into the house and returned with a small box wrapped in familiar cream paper, the ribbon slightly worn but intact. Inside was the photo album, the one that had traveled away and come back unopened. I handed it to her. It was meant as a wedding gift. I said, "But it wasn't ready to be received." Leora opened it slowly, reverently. "Now it's yours, because you knew how to hold it." She didn't say anything right away, just flipped through the pages, her fingers pausing at each memory, giving it the attention it deserved. I stood, brushed dirt from my knees, and turned to the garden. I didn't get the wedding title, the head table, or the spotlight, but I got something better, the last word. They say silence can protect or punish, but sometimes silence is the only voice that finally gets heard. I shared my story not because I want pity, but because I know I'm not the only one. Many of you watching have felt invisible in your own families, erased from your own legacy. Maybe your kindness was mistaken for weakness. Maybe you stayed quiet just to keep the peace. But here's what I've learned. Boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges to self-respect. Love without limits is not love, and you are allowed to rewrite your story, even if they tried to cut you out of theirs. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the guest at your own life, or like you gave everything and still ended up outside the door? If this video touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why I'm listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more real stories like this one. Your voice matters here, and your story might be the next one we tell.